right majority.
David Mundell.
Speaker, shameful and disgrace are words that Nicola Sturgeon likes to bandy at her opponents, but they truly apply to her announcement yesterday that while Scotland continues to have some of the worst COVID rates in Europe, she is diverting resources into another divisive independence referendum. So will my right honourable friend confirm that the focus of this government will be to work constructively across the United Kingdom to defeat COVID, to save jobs and to restore our economy?
Indeed. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Our focus is on rebuilding our economy. Our focus is on restoring our NHS. And I think most right-minded Scots would agree with me that using civil service resources to design a prospectus for independence is the wrong thing to be doing at this time.
John Lamont.
Mr. Speaker, over the summer, new data published by the SNP Scottish Government showed that the union dividend to be worth £2,210 per person in Scotland. So does the Minister agree with me that these figures simply confirm the benefit of Scotland remaining at the heart of a strong United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely would, and I'd further add to my honourable friend with the recent JERS reports in August that they showed that the deficit last year for the Scottish budget was £36.3 billion. £36.3 billion is more than the Scottish Government spends on education, housing, transport, culture and health.
Thomas Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, we know that for the last 2 years the Government has been spending taxpayers' money researching public opinion in Scotland on the state of the Union. And for 2 years I have been trying to get answers as to what that research says. For 2 years the Cabinet Office has refused, including appealing to the Court of Law and bringing in outside consultants to fund its case. Is it not time, if he believes so much that the Union is such a wonderful thing, to tell us what he has found out about what Scottish people think of the State of the Union and publish this research?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said before at this dispatch box, that is a matter for the Cabinet Office, and I suggest you raise that at Cabinet Office questions.
Alan Kearns.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State update the House about the additional, or the scale of the additional financial resource Scotland received as a result of the COVID pandemic? And does he agree that it's the strength of the UK balance sheet that allows the UK Government to support every part of the United Kingdom at times of crisis?
Well, I absolutely agree, my right honourable friend. I mean, the strength of support was over £14 billion during the COVID crisis, and the furlough support was over 900,000 jobs in Scotland, which is nearly a third of the Scottish workforce at the height of the pandemic.
Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by joining the Secretary of State in congratulating our Olympians and Paralympians on their wonderful medals haul in Tokyo. And can I also congratulate the Scottish football team on what was a marvellous result last night. But he knows as well as all Scots do that it's the hope that kills you, so let's not celebrate too much. Mr. Speaker, our shared social security system is vital to underpinning our union, of course. But by the next Scottish questions, the Government will have made the largest ever overnight cut to social security for those in work by removing the £20 from universal credit. Citizens Advice Scotland say more than half of those are worried about being able to buy food. At the same time, this government has broken another promise and wants to increase national insurance, the highest tax rise in 40 years. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation say around 150,000 working families in Scotland on low incomes will pay an average of £100 extra in tax while losing £1,000. So can the Secretary of State tell the House what advice did he give to those families who are on low incomes of where they should cut £1,100 from their family budget?
Mr. Speaker, the uplift in universal credit was always intended to be temporary. It was to help claimants through the economic shock and the financial disruption of the pandemic. And we now have a plan. We've got the Kickstart programme, and we've got a multi-billion-pound plan for jobs. And I understand that it's difficult when you have to break a manifesto promise, and the Prime Minister is very clear that he did that in raising national insurance. But he also had a manifesto promise to address social care, something that since 1997, when Tony Blair said he would address it, something that hasn't been done.
Well, there's no money going into social care, Mr. Speaker, but we'll leave that to a different time. Our shadow team had the opportunity to visit Orkney last week to the European Marine Energy Centre. They have facilities such as the most powerful tidal turbine in the world that results in them having excess energy that they can't get back to the mainland, while at the same time the Scottish and UK governments are backing the Cambo oil field. So can I ask the Secretary of State, for COP26 coming to Scotland, should he not be leading by example, refuse Cambo and at the same time reform the outdated transmission charge regime while providing funding for a new large capacity interconnector between Orkney and Shetland to the mainland that will bring huge benefits and innovation to the islands but power large parts of Scotland from renewable resources?
Well, first of all, I say on Cambo, all our North Sea oil licences are factored into the 2050 net zero plan. And I also take on the interconnector that's something where discussions are ongoing, and it's part obviously devolved because Ofgem are involved and others, etc. But leaving that to one side, I would take the overall view on oil and gas is that there will be multi-uses for oil and gas for years to come. People have to understand that. And my view is that if you're going to get your oil, you may as well get it domestically rather than import it.
Andrew Jones.
5, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues who are as excited as I am to ensure we strengthen transport connections across the United Kingdom. We recognise the importance of transport and how it is vital to economic growth, job creation and social cohesion, and that is why the Union Connectivity Review was commissioned. I look forward to the final report being published later this year.
Jones.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. The family links, the business links, the cultural links between Harrogate and Nesborough and Scotland are growing, but for them to grow further, they'll need better connectivity. And the East Coast Main Line is at the heart of that. So will he welcome the investment that's currently being made in that line and highlight its importance into that Union Connectivity Review which he just mentioned?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the government's determined to level up every corner of the United Kingdom, bringing communities across the country closer together. That's important. These infrastructure reports are very important to growing our economy. Wherever you create connectivity, you create economic growth. We recognise the importance of that.
Newland.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. Fine words. So in which year, by which year, will the high-speed rail line be extended to the Scottish border?
Which high-speed rail line did you have in mind? HS2 going north, or Galashiels coming south? I mean, just wait till the outcome of the connectivity review, which I have to say the SNP did not engage in. Not only that, rather irresponsibly, your Transport Minister told his officials, his civil servant officials, they couldn't engage with Sir Peter Hendy, they couldn't give him any data, and then when we offered £20 million access to £20 million for feasibility studies, you declined it.
Tamanjit Singh Desi.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Well said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An inquiry into the devolved aspects of the COVID-19 response was an SNP manifesto commitment, and the Scottish Government has now set out its next steps. The UK Government is committed to a statutory inquiry into all key aspects of the UK's response to the pandemic. As the Prime Minister has stated, we will consult the devolved administrations before finalising the scope of that inquiry.
Tamanjit Singh Desi.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the pandemic, one of the most dangerous impacts hasn't been just the virus itself, but the impact that it has had on our NHS, preventing other life-saving operations from actually taking place. In Scotland, the situation has been made even worse through the Scottish SNP government's under-investment in the NHS, with over 450,000 people languishing on waiting lists prior to the pandemic, and that figure has now risen to over 600,000. Exactly. So will the Minister work to ensure that the COVID public inquiry in Scotland will look into other aspects of the NHS?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right to highlight that the impacts of the pandemic are felt in many areas and other parts of the health service, and there is a need to catch up with that backlog of missed operations and treatments. And I'm absolutely delighted that yesterday the Prime Minister set out very real progress and steps to make that happen, with additional spending in the NHS right across the United Kingdom.
Shadow Minister Chris Elmo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to tell the House that Scotland now has one of the highest COVID rates in all of Europe, with 8 out of 20 hotspots across Europe in Scotland, according to the WHO. Instead of learning the lessons of the last year, the SNP government have wasted the summer months with the virus spiralling out of control. And while COVID rate soars, the First Minister announced this week the Scottish civil servants will be tasked with drawing up arguments for Scottish independence. In the Minister's discussions with the Scottish Government, as he discussed the issue of Scottish civil servants being diverted from crucial COVID-19 response work to plans for another independence referendum, and can he confirm that this will form part of the COVID-19 inquiry into the Scottish Government's failures?
Well, I'm very happy to agree with the honourable gentleman, whether it's on learning the lessons from COVID and making sure that our public services can catch up, whether it's on tackling drug abuse and a whole range of other public service and social issues. That should be the primary focus of the Scottish Government, and not obsessing with another divisive referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, if we have time, I will answer questions 7 and 10 together. This government's already struck trade deals with more than 68 countries, as well as the EU, worth $744 billion a year. This will create new markets for Scotland's exporters, including our world-leading food and drink sector. The Department for International Trade team based in Edinburgh is also helping Scottish businesses thrive and grow international, and last week I was delighted to meet the new DIT Director for Scotland heading up this team, and I look forward to planning further engagement with her and our team.
Scott Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's businesses will be among the main beneficiaries of the trade deals we have already secured around the world with our historic agreement with Japan, boosting trading opportunities for over 500 Scottish businesses alone. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we will now be able to use our new status as an independent trading nation to promote the very best that Scottish industries have to offer to the world?
I obviously completely agree with my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. This government is working hard to strike new deals, new trade deals around the world that will benefit key business sectors and consumers across Scotland and across the whole of the UK. We are opening new opportunities for iconic Scottish and British industries to thrive overseas.
Speaker, as the government negotiates new free trade deals around the world as Global Britain, and the new agreement with Australia removes the 5% tariff on the export of whisky to Australia, hot on the heels of the reduction of, the tariff-free period of 5 years with the United States, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the advantage to Scotland of negotiating together with the United Kingdom for free trade deals makes the case for the United Kingdom to be together as one country?
On that final point raised by my honourable friend, I couldn't agree more. It's hugely welcome to see the removal of the 5% tariff on Scotch whisky in the agreement in principle between the UK and Australia. This will help Scottish whisky distillers continue to expand exports to Australia, which have almost doubled over the last decade, making Australia our 8th largest market by value.
Final question, Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wonder if the Minister, with all these free trade deals, wonder if the Minister can detail what was the losses to the seafood industry through Brexit, what was the compensation they've received from the UK Government, what's the current losses to the hospitality industry because they can't access EU labour, and what's the total losses to the Scottish Food and Drink Federation because of the shortages caused by the HGV lorry driver crisis?
I didn't quite catch all of that, Mr. Speaker, but I did catch the words fishing and HGV drivers. On fishing, I wouldn't be surprised if I talked to much more people in the fishing industry than the honourable gentleman does, and I will take my advice on the situation in the fishing industry from them rather than from members opposite or indeed Twitter and the rest of social media. In terms of HGV drivers, as my right honourable friend the Secretary of State has already said, We recognise this issue. This is not a Brexit issue. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing the exact same problem right across Europe and, in fact, right across the world. And the UK government have already put measures in place to help increase and improve and speed up the recruitment of HGV drivers in this country.
Order. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on the Parliament Live TV. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mick Whitley.
Number one. Mr. Colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the run-up to the last election, the Prime Minister said that it's wrong that hundreds of thousands of people are forced to rely on food banks to survive. But research released by the Trussell Trust today showed that 1 in 6 people fear that they will almost certainly have to use a food bank in just 4 weeks' time as a result of the government's decision to act the £20 uplift to universal credit. That's over 500 families and 1,000 children being forced into food poverty in my constituency of Birkenhead alone. Will the Prime Minister concede that the cut to universal credit is wrong, and will he change course?
Mr. Speaker, in fact, of course, I'm very grateful to everybody who helps with food banks, and they do a fantastic job. But what this government has done throughout the pandemic is to put the most protection for those who need it most across society. And I'm proud of what we've done by uplifting the living wage, and proud of the arm we put around the whole of the British people.
Greg McKinley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could my right honourable friend offer me an answer to the constituents I have of the future as they sit around a tepid radiator powered by an inefficient and expensive air source heating unit, worrying about the payments on the electric car that they didn't want either, while they watched the growing economies of the world going hell for leather building new gas and coal power stations, because they will be asking me why. Could the Prime Minister please commit to solutions that are technologically possible to reduce Britain's CO2, rather than uncosted commitments, which I'm sorry we'll be hearing a lot of at COP26?
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only has the price of batteries fallen vertiginously, the cost of solar power has fallen vertiginously, but I'd tell my honourable friend the people of Thanet South, where they have huge opportunities. The cost of wind power in this country has fallen 70% just in the last 10 years. And what I think the people of Thanet want to see, and I'm sure he exemplifies it, is a spirit of Promethean technological optimism, Mr. Speaker.
Come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask the Prime Minister about the promise he made to the British people to guarantee that no one needing care has to sell their home to pay for it. Does that guarantee still stand?
Mr. Speaker, what this plan for health and social care does is deal after decades with the catastrophic costs faced by millions of people, the risks that they face up and down the country, that they could face the loss of their home, their possessions, their ability to pass on anything to their children. This is the government that is not only dealing with that problem, but understands that in order to deal with the problems of the NHS backlogs, you also have to fix social care. We're taking the tough decisions, Mr. Speaker, that the country wants to see. We're putting another £36 billion in. And what I'd like to know from the leader of the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, is what is he going to do tonight? The silence from mission control in his...
Can I just say, if you don't want to hear the Prime Minister, I certainly do, and I can't hear him. It's not acceptable. Prime Minister, have you finished?
Leader of the Opposition, whether he's going to vote for our measures tonight, Mr. Speaker.
I know the House has been away, but it's still Prime Minister's questions. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed the Prime Minister didn't stand by his guarantee that no one will need to sell their house to pay for care. Let me explain why he didn't. Under the Prime Minister's plan, someone with £186,000, if you include the value of their home, that's not untypical across the country in all of your constituents. facing large costs because they have to go into care, will have to pay £86,000 under his plan, and that's before living costs. Where does the Prime Minister think that they're going to get that £86,000 without selling their home?
Mr. Speaker, as I think everybody understood in the long debate, a long statement yesterday, this is the first time that the state has actually come in to deal with the threat of these catastrophic costs, and thereby enabling, Mr. Speaker, the private sector, the financial services industry, to supply the products, the insurance products that people need to guarantee themselves against the cost of care. And what we're actually doing, Mr. Speaker, is lifting the floor, lifting the guarantee for up to £100,000, where nobody has to pay anything across the entire country. And what we still have to hear from the opposition is what they would do to fix the backlogs in the NHS. And fix social care after decades of inertia and inactivity. What would he do?
Keir Starmer.
His plan is to impose an unfair tax on working people. My plan is to ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. That is the difference. That is the...
Order. Both sides. I need to hear the question. I also need to hear the answers. If there's some MPs who don't want to hear it, and I'm sure the constituents want to hear it, it's not good to shout either side down when they are either asking or answering a question. Please, our constituents are interested. I want to hear, and they'll want to hear. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His plan is to impose unfair taxes on working people. My plan is to ensure those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. I know they don't like that debate. The truth is, his plans don't do what he claims. People will still face huge bills. Many homeowners will need to sell their homes. He's not denying it when he could have done. And the Prime Minister has failed the only test he set for himself for social care. It was in the manifesto. Another manifesto promise, Prime Minister. No good shaking your head. And who's going to pay for the cost of this failure? Working people. Under his plan, a landlord renting out dozens of properties won't pay a penny more, but their tenants in work will face tax rises of hundreds of pounds a year. A care worker earning the minimum wage doesn't get a pay rise under this plan, but does get a tax rise. In what world is that fair?
Mr. Speaker, actually the Institute for Fiscal Studies has confirmed that this is a broad-based and progressive measure. The top 20% of households by income will pay 40 times what the poorest 20% pay. The top 14% pay half of the entire levy. Now, Mr. Speaker, he talks about his plan. Well, actually, it turns out I've been scouring the records for evidence of the Labour plan, and I found it, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, the current Shadow Secretary of State for Social Care joined forces with Nick Bowles and Norman Lamb to promote a new dedicated health and social care tax, Mr. Speaker, based on national insurance. The current, where is she? I can't see her in her place, Mr. Speaker. And she said this was to be the country's beverage moment. Well, is the Labour Party really going to vote against the new beverage moment tonight?
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what an ambitious young member for Henley said in 2002 in this House. What he said in this House: national insurance increases are regressive. I wonder what happened to him. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is going ahead with this unfair tax, can he at least tell us this? Will his plan clear the NHS waiting list backlog by the end of this Parliament? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House, indeed the whole country, can appreciate that we at least have a plan to fix the backlogs. And we at least understand, Mr. Speaker, that the only way to fix the long-term underlying problems in the NHS, the problem of delayed discharges, is to fix the crisis in social care as well, which Labour failed to address for decades. And we're going on ahead and doing it, Mr. Speaker. And what I've just understood for him tonight, I think out of that minestrone of nonsense has floated a crouton of fact. He is going to vote against the measures tonight. They're going to vote against plans to fix the backlogs and fix social care. Vote Labour, Mr. Speaker. Wait longer.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was a yes-no question. You either clear the backlog or you don't. And he can't even say that he'll do that. So there we have it. Working people will pay higher tax. Those in need will still lose their homes to pay for care. And he can't even say if the NHS backlog will be cleared. Well, he gesticulates, but they're all breaking their manifesto promises and putting up taxes on their working constituents for this. And, Mr. Speaker, tax rises aren't the only way he's making working people worse off. 2.5 million working families will face a double whammy, a national insurance tax rise and £1,000 a year universal credit cut. They're getting hit from both sides. Of all the ways to raise public funds, why is the Prime Minister insisting on hammering working people?
Mr. Speaker, we're proud of what we've been doing throughout this pandemic to look after working people. We're proud of the extra £9 billion we put in through universal credit. And, Mr. Speaker, I think people in this House and across the country should know Labour wants to scrap universal credit altogether. We believe in higher wages and better skills, Mr. Speaker, and it is working. That's why we're investing in 13,500 work coaches, £3,000 a year for 11 million adults across this country to train under the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. And it's working, Mr. Speaker, because for the first time since 2019, after years and years of stagnation, you are seeing wages are rising, Mr. Speaker. Wages are rising for the lower paid. They believe in welfare. We believe in higher wages and higher skills and better jobs.
Higher wages and higher skills, he says. How out of touch he is. What do they laugh? What do they say to Rosie? What do they say to Rosie? Because Rosie's the sort of person that this impacts on. Laugh away. A single mother working on the minimum wage in a nursing home. She got in touch with me. She will lose £87 a month due to the universal credit cut. A huge amount to her. She will now also be hit with a national insurance tax rise. She's asked for more shifts, and she can't get them. She's unable to get further help with childcare. What does the Prime Minister, what does the laughter say to Rosie? This is a government that underfunded the NHS for a decade before the pandemic, took £8 billion out of social care before the pandemic, then wasted billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on dodgy contracts, vanity projects and giveaways to their mates. They cut stamp duty on second homeowners, super tax deductions for the biggest companies, and now they're telling millions of working people that they must cough up more tax. Isn't this the same old Tory party, always putting their rich mates and donors before working people?
Minister. Well, I think very sadly, Mr. Speaker, what you're hearing is the same old nonsense from Labour, because what they want to do, they want to scrap a universal credit, and I have every sympathy for Rosie, and I admire her and families up and down the land. But the best thing we can do for them is have a strong and dynamic economy. And as I speak to you now, our economy is the fastest growing in the G7, Mr. Speaker, because we've had the fastest vaccine rollout and the fastest opening up of any comparable country, Mr. Speaker. And never forget that he would have kept us in the European Medicines Agency. He attacked the vaccines task force, Mr. Speaker. And if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight in July, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't have the fastest growing economy in the G7. We'd still be in lockdown, Mr. Speaker. And it's true. And if we listened to him today, we wouldn't be trying to fix the NHS backlogs, and we wouldn't be finally dealing with social care, Mr. Speaker. This is the government that takes the tough decisions to take this country forward.
A little more if you listen to Mr. Jones's question. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that while the recent extension of the grace periods for the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is welcome, it does not yet amount to a permanent fix of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which Lord Trimble suggests is inimical to the Belfast Agreement? And will he confirm that in the continuing negotiations, the government will draw the attention of the EU to the positive advantages of mutual enforcement as advocated in the recent excellent paper by the Centre for Brexit Policy?
Yes, I thank both my right honourable friend and the Centre for Brexit Policy for their analysis. And it's good that the interim period has been extended, because clearly the protocol, as it is being applied by our friends in the EU, is not, in my view, protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement as it should in all its aspects, and we must sort it out.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, without consultation, the Prime Minister announced plans to impose a regressive Tory poll tax on millions of Scottish workers. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimates that around 2 million families on low incomes will now pay an average of an extra £100 a year because of the Prime Minister's tax hike. Yet again, the Tories are fleecing Scottish families, hitting low and middle income workers and penalising the young. A Tory Work and Pension Secretary, former Tory Work and Pension Secretary, called it a sham. A former Tory Chancellor has said this is the poor subsidising the rich. A former Tory Prime Minister has called this regressive. Prime Minister, isn't this the case that this Tory tax hike is once again balancing the books on the backs of the poor and the young?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman says there was no consultation. Actually, I much enjoy my conversations with representatives of the Scottish administration, and one thing they said to me was they wanted more funding for the NHS, Mr. Speaker. And I'm delighted that we're putting another £1.1 billion into the NHS and in Scotland, Mr. Speaker, while all they can talk about is another referendum. And I think that is a clear distinction between us and the Scottish Nationalist parties about what are the real priorities of the people of this country.
In Blackford.
No answer to the question, because the facts are this is a tax hike on the poor and on the young, Prime Minister, and you should be ashamed of yourself, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we now know the economic direction of this toxic Tory government. We're going to see furlough scrapped, universal credit cut, more tax hikes for the low paid. Let us be in no doubt, this is the return of the Tories' austerity agenda. It is austerity 2.0. On this Prime Minister's watch, the United Kingdom now has the worst levels of poverty and inequality anywhere in North West Europe. And in-work poverty, Prime Minister, has risen to record levels this century. More Tory austerity cuts will make this even worse. Scotland deserves better. There is clearly no chance of a fair COVID recovery under this Prime Minister and under this Westminster government. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that the only way to protect Scotland from Tory cuts and the regressive tax hikes is to become an independent country with the full powers needed to build a fair, strong and equal recovery for the people of Scotland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that is the right priority for this country or for the people of Scotland. And I just remind him, actually, the words of the Deputy Leader of the Scottish Government, who welcomed it when the Labour Government put up NI by a penny to pay for National Health Service. He said, "I'm absolutely delighted," there's a guy called John Swinney, "I'm absolutely delighted that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has now accepted that progressive taxation is required to invest in the health service in Scotland, Mr. Speaker." I mean, get your story straight. This is more cash for people in Scotland. It's more investment for families in Scotland. It's good for Scotland and good for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The growing populations of Grantham and Stamford require a long-term integrated healthcare strategy. Can the Prime Minister confirm what action the government is taking to implement regular reviews of healthcare provision to meet the future needs of my constituency?
My honourable friend is quite right. He's a great advocate for people of Grantham and Stamford, and the Health and Care Bill will ensure that there are integrated healthcare partnerships bringing together local authorities and local healthcare, but there is more to be done, and that will be done in the forthcoming white paper.
Ed David.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday's social care plan forgot family carers. Yet we're the millions wiping bottoms, washing and dressing our loved ones, whether they're elderly or disabled, ill or dying. We carers just want a fair deal. So will the Prime Minister raise carers' allowance? Will he guarantee proper breaks for carers? Will he change employment law so we can balance caring with work? And will he ensure there are enough professional carers to help, starting with a new visa for carers? Mr. Speaker, we carers have a lifetime of ideas to improve our loved ones' care. So why does the Prime Minister keep ignoring us and taking carers for granted?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House acknowledges the massive debt we owe to unpaid carers such as himself up and down the country, and we thank them for what they're doing. What this plan does is, of course, mean that there will be a huge injection of support, both from the private sector and from the government, into caring across the board. And I believe that will support unpaid carers as well, since they will no longer have the anxiety, for instance, that their loved ones, their elderly loved ones, could see the loss of all their possessions. What we're also doing for carers is making sure that we invest now £500 million in their training, in their profession, to make sure that they have the dignity and progression in their jobs that they deserve.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ainion and Ethel Jones from Mynydd Mostyn Dairy in my constituency have created a real buzz. By serving a self-serve milk facility on their farm for the local community. Sadly, the local council have served them with an enforcement notice, which has led to almost 9,000 locals signing a petition in support of them. Does my right honourable friend agree that businesses that have done their best to survive and diversify over this horrendous last year should be supported and not threatened by the local authority as they do all they can to grow their business?
I thank him for his question, as he knows planning is a devolved matter, but what I can tell him and the House is that we provided business with over £100 billion of support throughout the pandemic, including 1.5 million bounce-back loans to SMEs such as the one he describes.
Ben Lake.
Mr. Speaker, with widespread concern about the HGV driver crisis, I've been contacted by a number of drivers from Ceredigion who believe the decision to increase drivers' hours will fail to solve the problem. They're clear that a long-term solution requires improved working conditions, acting on the 2018 government report on parking spaces and driver facilities, and also measures to reduce waiting times at distribution centres. Will the Prime Minister consider these measures? And to what timescale is his government working to fix the crisis?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I also thank him for notice of his question. We're working with industry to get more people into HGV driving, which is a great and well-remunerated profession, including by ramping up vocational test capacity, funding apprenticeships for people training as a lorry driver. As the House heard earlier on, this is an issue. The career structure of HGV drivers is affecting countries across the whole of the EU. But can I propose that the honourable gentleman takes up his proposal directly with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport?
Richard Drax, close question.
Number 15, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to levelling up the whole country, and Dorset is no exception. I'm delighted that the Local Growth Fund in Dorset has contributed £98.4 million to 54 projects since 2015, and I understand that Dorset Council have also made a bid to the Levelling Up Fund to improve access at Weymouth Station.
Richard Drax.
As a former soldier, time is never wasted on reconnaissance. And can I ask my right honourable friend to come and get some good Dorset sea air to visit Weymouth and to see the infrastructure for himself? Because until we improve it, we can't attract the investment and the jobs and prosperity that we desperately need at an ancient seaside resort that needs a bit of love, attention and government money.
I can think of nothing nicer than a trip to Weymouth, which I think was the favourite watering hole of George III, I'm told by the Lord Chancellor. But I will do my utmost to oblige him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents spent hours waiting to get through to someone on the government-issued number for non-British nationals in Afghanistan. Distressed and fearful for his family, he was relieved when he eventually spoke to someone. However, when they thought my constituent had hung up, he overheard them laughing and say to a colleague, "We are having to lie to people. We are giving them false hope. The whole thing is an entire scam." Is it the Foreign Secretary, the Defence Secretary, the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister who's responsible for this scam?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole country should be proud of what we've done to welcome people from Afghanistan. Operation Warm Welcome continues, and as I speak to you, Mr. Speaker, we've already received more than 15,000 people from the Kabul airlift, the biggest exercise this country has undertaken. I'm sorry to hear about the particular case that she raises. Can I propose that can I ask her to send it directly to me, and I will take it up?
Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, we have thousands of illegal immigrants arriving on our shores every single month. When are we going to take some direct action and send the boats straight back?
Mr. Speaker, I share the indignation and the frustration of my honourable friend at the cruel behaviour of the gangsters, the criminal masterminds who are taking money from desperate, frightened people to help them take a very, very dangerous journey across the Channel. This is a perennial problem, but my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is dealing with it in the best possible way, which is to make sure that they don't leave those French shores. We depend to a large extent on what the French are doing, but clearly, as time goes on and this problem continues, we are going to have to make sure that we use every possible tactic at our disposal to stop what I think is a vile trade and a manipulation of people's hopes.
Neil Hanvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, my constituency, Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, is the fourth most impacted by the cut to working tax credits and universal credit. And it's impacting families that are working in multiple jobs. £1,000 may only cover the cost for a single roll of wallpaper in the Prime Minister's flat. However, can he please set out his understanding of the plight of the working poor, and can he explain to the House what he means when he says they should see their wages rise through their own efforts?
Mr. Speaker, I think that everybody sympathises with people who are on low incomes, who we tried to protect throughout the pandemic, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, brought forward a package that was recognised around the world as being almost uniquely progressive in the way that we directed funding and support at the lowest paid and at the neediest. And that was quite right. But what we're also now trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is ensure that we have a high-wage and high-skilled, jobs-led recovery. And that is what is happening. And I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, to be a Conservative Prime Minister who is seeing wages rise now for the lowest paid by the fastest rate for many years.
James Ray.
This is, I think, the first opportunity the whole House will have to thank all of those who played a role in rolling out the superb vaccine programme over the last 6 months or so, ranging from the whole of the National Health Service, the military, and if I may, Mr. Speaker, a particular word for the Order of St John Ambulance, of which I have the honour to be an honorary commander. All parties in the House who might have an interest in St John will have an opportunity to thank them personally, if they'd like to do so, in a reception which I'm hosting on the terrace straight after PMQs today. And it might be that you, Mr. Speaker, or perhaps the Prime Minister or others would honour us with their presence just to thank these thousands of volunteers who've done such superb work over the last 6 months.
I indeed join my honourable friend in thanking the St John's Ambulance for everything that they do. They've been fantastic, and I've met many St John Ambulance volunteers during the last 18 months. They've done an absolutely astonishing job. I don't think I can myself come to his reception, but I hope it will be well attended. I'm sure it will be very well attended. Can I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to urge everybody in the country who has not yet had a vaccination, who is eligible for one, to get it as soon as they can.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With a net approval rating among Tory supporters of -53, can the Prime Minister get to his feet, put his hand on his heart, promise the country, this House and his own supporters that the Education Secretary is the right person for the job and he's up to the job?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House will recognise that the Education Secretary has done a heroic job of dealing with a very difficult circumstance in which we've had to close schools, Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, and never forget. I think the job of teachers, the job of parents up and down the land would have been made much easier if Labour and the Labour leadership in particular had the guts, and he'd had the guts to say that schools are safe, Mr. Speaker.
Gillian Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our constituents, including mine in Hertford and Stortford, should come forward, see their GP if they have concerns about their health, and that his statement yesterday should give them assurance, confidence that this government is there for the NHS and that the NHS will be there for them in their time of need?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're putting another £36 billion under the measures we're putting forward tonight, and I'm absolutely astonished that the party of Nye Bevan has repeated or confirmed today that they're not going to vote for that. We want GPs to be seeing the right people at the right time. We want to fix the waiting lists, Mr. Speaker, and that is the objective of the measures that we're bringing forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Funding for organisations helping vulnerable or hard-to-reach citizens with the EU resettlement scheme is due to end at the end of this month. My own constituent tried to get assistance from local citizens' advice in March, but funding cuts meant they couldn't help him. He's been unable to get support from the Resolution Centre either, and has now been refused settled status. So can I ask the Prime Minister what practical support will be provided to EU citizens still navigating this system, and what does the Prime Minister advise my constituent to do to ensure that he has the right to stay in his home of 47 years?
Well, I'm of course sorry to hear about the troubles her constituent is experiencing, but I would just remind her that under the EU settlement scheme, we have helped, I think, almost 6 million people to settle in this country. I think a number which is far more than double the number that was expected at the time of the Brexit referendum, Mr. Speaker, and I think a tribute to the compassion of this country and its willingness to help those who come here and make their lives here.
Tom Bell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. St Francis Tower in Ipswich has been a beneficiary of the Building Safety Fund. However, Oanda and Block Management, who manage the building, have put a shrink wrap on the entire tower, which is going to be on there for up to 12 months. So many of those tenants who are desperate are living in darkness for 12 months, and they've put bars on the windows so they can barely open them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that yes, this vital work needs to take place, but we need to balance, we need to do this work quickly with the lives and the mental health of those people who are desperate and are in that tower right now?
My honourable friend, I'm sure, raises a very important point. I will study the detail of what he said. I will ask the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to take up the matter directly.
Gareth Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, working people who are graduates, such as a newly qualified nurse, earning the average wage or under, will face a marginal tax rate of almost 50% under the plans he is bringing in today. Isn't this yet another example of the Conservative Party asking those on lower incomes to pay more so that his privileged friends have to pay less?
No, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, the top 20% of income households pay 40 times more than the poorest. And as for pay for nurses, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this measure funds. And that is why it is so astonishing that he and his party are actually determined to vote against it tonight.
Final question, Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Friday, I have a private member's bill, Asylum Seekers Return to Safe Countries Bill. The intention is, if an asylum seeker comes to this country from a safe country, they're returned to that country, and it would end the problem of people coming across the Channel. Would the Prime Minister urge his colleagues to vote for the bill on Friday?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we have brought forward the Sovereign Borders Bill, which, of course, will no longer make it possible for the law to treat somebody who's come here illegally in the same way as someone who has come here legally. And I think it is high time that that distinction was made, and people understand that there is a price to pay if they come to this country in an illegal fashion.
Can I just say, there is some disappointment we didn't get through this. Can I just say, an appeal to the leaders to see if we can speed up to get those members who miss out.
Point of order.
No, point of order don't come now, come after UQs. We've got... What is it relevant to? We've got an urgent question. But normally they come after UQs. That's that. You know that better than anybody. You're the expert. In fact, you're Mr. Protocol. You know better than me. We now come to the urgent question. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've waited a while for this one, so I can wait a few seconds longer, I'm sure, to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office if he will make a statement on government plans to introduce vaccine passports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our vaccination programme has given this nation a wall of protection from this deadly virus. Data from Public Health England estimates that 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine offers protection of around 96% against hospitalisation, and that our jabs have prevented over 100,000 deaths, over 143,000 hospitalisations, and around 24 million infections. It is this protection, Mr. Speaker, that has allowed us to carefully ease restrictions over the past few months. However, we must do so in a way that is mindful of the benefits that both doses of the vaccine can bring. On the 19th of July, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that by the end of September, when everyone aged 18 and over will have had the chance to get fully vaccinated, that the government plans to make full vaccination the condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather. As a condition of entry to these venues, people will need to show that they are fully vaccinated, and proof of a negative test will no longer be sufficient. We'll be confirming more details about this in due course, Mr. Speaker. This approach is designed to reduce transmission and serious illness. It is in line with the approach we've taken on international travel, where different rules apply depending on whether you've had both jabs. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to end by urging people to come forward to get the jab. 88% of people have had one jab, and over 80% of people 16 and over have now had the protection of both doses. It is the best way to protect yourself, your loved ones and your community. So please come forward and join them and make our wall of protection even stronger.
Mr Speaker. Can I first of all thank you for allowing me to ask this urgent question? As Big Brother Watch bring their campaign against vaccine passports to Westminster today, it is certainly timely. The introduction of vaccine passports will have enormous practical implications for the literally thousands of businesses across the country who will be required to gather and to hold our data, and it is on these aspects that the answers are most urgently required from the government, not, as the Minister has just said, in due course. The deadline for implementation of this scheme is now just 3 weeks away. We must not, however, lose sight of the fact that a scheme of this sort opens the door to a major change in the relationship between the citizen and the state. Never before in peacetime has government in this country controlled in this way where we can go, with whom and what to do. And if the government has concluded that this now has to change, then at the very least, this House must have a chance to make its voice heard and its views known. So when will we get the vote that the Minister promised us before the recess? The case for vaccine passports is riddled with inconsistencies. Nightclubs have been open now since July, and notwithstanding recent events in Aberdeen, they have been relatively safe. If they are safe today for people to enjoy responsibly, then what does the government expect to change between now and the end of the month? On Monday, the Minister told me at the dispatch box, we do know that 60% of people who have had 2 jabs will not become infected with the Delta variant and therefore cannot infect someone else, although 40% can and will. The 40% figure highlights one of the biggest dangers of the whole idea, taking people into large social gatherings where they think they will be safe from infection, but in fact they are not. The Minister will know that there will always be some who cannot be vaccinated. So if entry to nightclubs or events is to be dependent on demonstrating vaccination, they will be excluded. So can the Minister tell the House what assessment has the government made with regard to their duties under equalities legislation? A study by the Nighttime Industries Association found that 69% of their members view the introduction of vaccine passports as having a negative impact on business. 70% said they were not necessary for opening their business. Why is the government not listening to the experts in the industry? When will the nightclubs and other businesses be told how they will be expected to check the vaccine status of their patrons? What legal authority will they have to do this, and what will be the consequences for them if they do not? On the 12th of July, the Secretary of State for Health told the House, as we move away from regulations, there will no longer be a legal requirement for any establishment to have COVID vaccine certification. When did that change and why?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's questions, and let me attempt to address them. But I will begin by just saying to the House that no one in this government, certainly not this Prime Minister, it is not his DNA to curtail people's freedoms or require people to show a piece of paper before they enter a nightclub. The reason that we are moving forward on this is because if you look at what has happened in other countries where nightclubs were opening and then shutting again, opening and shutting again, is that we want to avoid that disruption and maintain sectors that can add to people's enjoyment of life and dance, as it did for the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, that they can do so sustainably. The reason for the end of September, which is one of his questions, is because by the end of September, all 18-year-olds and above would have had the chance to have 2 doses. And it is quite right when he quotes what I said to him at the dispatch box a few days ago, that for 60% of people who are double vaccinated, they will not be infected and therefore will not spread the infection, but 40% may do. And it is the view of our clinical experts that sort of the additional relative safety of having to be double vaccinated before you can enter a nightclub does begin to mitigate against super spreader events, which could cause us to then effectively take a decision to close nightclubs, which we would not want to do. He asked about the disruption to business. Well, as he will know, this is a tried and tested solution that has been extensively used throughout the government's events research programme. It requires venues to check or scan the NHS COVID pass in the same way nightclub bouncers check ID before entry. He then asked about the equalities impact assessment, and I can assure him that we conducted a full equalities impact assessment and consulted widely to understand the potential equalities impact of COVID status certification. Speaking to ethicists and representatives of disabilities, race and faith groups, the system allows both digital and non-digital proofs to help ensure access for all. So constituents who don't have a smartphone, for example, can confirm their vaccine status by calling 119 and getting that via email or via written letter. It is not something, as I say, we do lightly. It is something to allow us to transition this virus from pandemic to endemic status. We are coming towards the winter months when there will be upward pressure in terms of infections because of the return to school, because of winter, and of course large gatherings of people, especially indoor venues like nightclubs, could add to that. The mitigation against that, to allow us to transition this virus from pandemic status to endemic, would be the booster programme, which we will, I hope, be embarking upon later this month after the final recommendations from the JCVI.
We now come to William Wright.
What a load of rubbish. I don't believe my honourable friend believes a word which he just uttered, because I remember him very persuasively stating my position, which we shared at the time, that this measure would be discriminatory, and yet he's sent to the dispatch box to defend the indefensible. This is a needless fight that we seem prepared to have in this House over this issue, completely unnecessary. We all agree that people should be encouraged to take the vaccine, and I again encourage everybody to do so. But to go down this route, which is overtly discriminatory, will be utterly damaging to the fabric of society.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend, and he has made his view to me very clear on many occasions, and it pains me to have to take a step like this, because we do not take it lightly. But the flip side of that is that if we don't, and the virus does cause super spreader events in nightclubs, and I have to stand at the dispatch box and announce to the House that we'd have to close that sector, that would be much more painful to me.
Shadow Secretary Angela Lorraine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for bringing this important topic to the House. I want to also associate myself with the Minister's opening remarks today regarding vaccine uptake. I think it's incredibly important that people do take up that vaccine where possible, and I reiterate that from this dispatch box from the opposition as well. We're weeks away from implementation, Mr Speaker, but whilst ministers were relaxing over summer, there was no clarity from government about these plans, and businesses remain anxious. Our priorities are clear: protect the NHS and our economy, and we absolutely cannot be faced with an unmanageable winter crisis for both. So my first question to the Minister is really simple. What does the Minister think this will achieve? How and when will the UK Government decide which businesses must implement vaccine certification? And will they rely on low-paid staff at venues to act as public health officials, and what support will they be getting? The NHS COVID Pass application currently allows for individuals in England to either input a negative test result or complete a vaccine record. This is important for those that cannot, for legitimate medical reasons, take the vaccine. Can the Minister explain why the Government plans to drop the negative test option? Will they improve and keep available the NHS COVID pass application, or will it be replaced or outsourced? And let me be crystal clear, Mr. Speaker. We cannot support any potential COVID pass scheme for access to everyday services. So can the Minister categorically assure me that no one will be required to have a COVID vaccination pass to access essential services? Mr. Speaker, this government has divid-dawdled and, as some said, dad-danced away the summer. They have not planned or prepared, and they have not provided the reassurances or presented a clear path forward. UK business has had a hell of an 18 months during this difficult pandemic. They need a proactive, supportive government, and it's about time, Mr. Speaker, that ministers opposite work towards this aim.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Honourable Lady's opening words and her urging those who have not had a vaccine to come forward and be protected. She asked a number of important questions relating to this, including what this will achieve. Well, she will know that the ability for people to travel whilst being double vaccinated was something that was important, and the implementation of that was successful. Largely successful. We need to go further to make sure that we recognise other vaccines from other countries around the world that will be recognised by the WHO and our regulator and other regulators to make it even easier for people who are double vaccinated to travel to the United Kingdom. The NHS stands ready to continue both NHS England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, that joint work, as well as, of course, NHS X in terms of the technology. She asked about people's access to essential settings, incredibly important. I can assure her that there are some essential settings which will not need to for people to show COVID vaccine certification. These settings that have stayed open throughout the pandemic, such obviously public sector buildings, essential retail, essential services, and of course public transport. She asks also about what this will achieve domestically. Well, I think, I hope, combined with the vaccination programme, the booster programme, and all the work we've done around education, we'll be able to transition this virus post the winter from pandemic to endemic status. And the reason for this very difficult decision is to allow us to sustain the opening of the economy, including the nightclub sector, without having to flip-flop and go back and